Welcome to the Dylan Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Sessler, and today's episode 11, where I have an incredible guest lined up for you. My guest was diagnosed psychotic 13 years ago, institutionalized, sedated, and medicated, in his own personal hell. He took his health into his own hands and learned to overcome psychosis, multiple TBIs, chronic illness, and depression by simply using meditation. I shouldn't say simply, but using meditation, movement, biohacking, and nutrition. His popular YouTube channel features loads of practical tools for people so you can access them and start your self-healing abilities. Start learning about self-healing abilities right now. Find the link in the description, okay? My guest today is Nick Loffree. Nick, how are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. It's good to see you. It's good to meet you. I found Nick on TikTok. So just for people in reference, I'm Nick. I know you're on TikTok. You're on Instagram. You're on YouTube. I know you're bigger on YouTube, right?
Yeah, YouTube's probably my best resource.
Yeah.
Yeah, my TikTok overnight blew up into my most It's like more followers on TikTok I got in the last week than all my other platforms combined. So the benefit of going viral.
Absolutely. Yeah. Once you hit a video and it goes, like you got followers for sure.
Yeah.
But Nick, tell me a little bit about yourself. Obviously we got a little bit of bio, but tell me what the bio doesn't tell me.
Well, I think like you said, you said, I probably shouldn't say simply for the meditation and stuff. And it's true. It was really, really complicated. And, it wasn't just like, oh, something magical happened. Like I found one little tool and all of a sudden everything changed. It was like literally years and years of just slow, gradual process, trying one thing that sounded really healthy, but it actually took me several steps back because it wasn't the right kind of healthy thing for me. And so a whole lot of like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back for years and years. So it is really hard and complicated. And I think that's why, like the reason my TikTok thing kind of blew up was I was saying like, hey, look, like I fixed this crazy mental illness, that's like the top of like mental illness up there with like, PTSD and like the worst stuff. And I totally fixed it by like eating different and stuff. And it sounds like really amazing, right? But I think the reason that's not a more common story is because it is so complicated. There's so much conflicting information,
right?
Especially in the nutrition world. And it's just so much simpler to just be like, oh, here's this expert, they're a psychiatrist, they told me to take this pill. It's so easy to take a pill, right? And maybe it makes like the bulk of the problem go away for a while, but also maybe creates a whole bunch of other problems, but that aren't quite as bad compared to like the worst mental state you could possibly be in. It's like, all right, maybe I'm fat and impotent now, but like at least I'm not like paranoid out of my mind all the time, So
right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. Why don't you tell me your story? Give me an understanding of what brought on this psychosis, and then obviously you were institutionalized. Tell me a little bit about that, and then get into what all this complicated stuff. How did you get here to what you're doing now?
Well, how it came about is like, again, like a lot of complicated factors, and I'm not totally sure what's what. But my best guess is that, so first of all, I had a couple brain injuries. So one was me and my friends were doing this. I don't know if you've ever done this stupid thing where like you make yourself go unconscious for fun.
Yeah.
But you hyperventilate until you like pass out, basically. And my friend who was supposed to catch me, because we were doing it like standing up stupidly in a room with a concrete floor. And my friend who was supposed to kind of help me have a soft fall just kind of like let me go. And I hit my head on a concrete floor and had a seizure for like 30 seconds or something. And I was like really high at the time on marijuana. So when I woke up, I like didn't know who I was or where I was for a while. And so that was like one. And then basically I was like way too into drugs. This was all in high school. And I was using a lot of drugs, ecstasy, ketamine, weed every day. other drugs I actually had positive experiences with, like mushrooms and things like that, that like really gave me some profound like healing experiences. It felt like at the time.
Yep.
But just kind of really overdoing it. And one day I was skipping school and did like 3 hits of ecstasy, I think. And I wasn't really a smoker at the time, but somebody gave me a pack of cigarettes, and I was like, "Oh!" I smoked one. And I'm like, "Wow, this really makes the ecstasy better." And so I smoked all 20 cigarettes in like 2 hours as like a non-smoker.
Jeez.
And I think it must have triggered something was going on in my brain, and I wound up having a seizure. I just kind of fell into a bush and literally fell into a thorn bush and had a seizure in the thorn bush, which I'm glad I was unconscious for.
Right.
But I woke up and I'm like bleeding everywhere, and my shoulder was dislocated, and it was like nighttime all of a sudden. Like I was out for like a long time, and I had total amnesia. I didn't know who I was or where I was for like a couple hours, and was taken to the hospital, and I kind of lied to the paramedics. I was just like, "Oh yeah, I had a couple drinks or something," and they took my driver's license away because they thought I was an alcoholic or something. But so that kind of screwed with my brain. And later, actually, recently, maybe a year ago, I actually read an article that people with schizophrenia and psychosis, their brains actually process nicotine differently than ordinary people. So there might be some like genetic predisposition for nicotine to like mess with your brain more if you're predisposed to psychosis, which I found really interesting. I don't know if you ever heard Joseph Campbell's quote. I don't know if you know Joseph Campbell, the mythologist. Oh, yeah, but his quote is, the psychotic or schizophrenic drowns in the same water that the shaman swims. And I found it really interesting when I read that study, because shamans throughout North and South America like really prize nicotine, basically tobacco, as this like spiritual portal. Whereas I think like the ordinary person is like, oh, tobacco, like it's kind of fun to smoke, and you know, gets a little habit, something you do with your fingers and everything. But for me, if I like smoke tobacco, like right now, I'm gonna like trip out. Like it's gonna be like a weird experience. Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit like smoking weed with like more stimulation or something.
Sure.
So I think there actually might be some like genetic predisposition that can turn you into a schizophrenic, or I guess in a different cultural context, maybe a shaman or something.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So those were the main brain injuries, and then so this was all kind of happening around the same time, within like the same 6 months. So another weird thing was I wound up on antidepressants, mostly because I had crazy social anxiety in high school. Like I know probably everybody does, but I think mine was like especially intense. And I would go home from school and just my brain could not stop thinking about like, oh, everybody must hate me. Like, here's all the things I did today that probably embarrassed myself, and here's all the reasons nobody likes me. And it wasn't even really true. Like, I had lots of friends and was fairly popular, but I just couldn't stop thinking that way as soon as I was alone. So I went up on antidepressants, and but as a heavy drug user, I got in my mind like, oh, the antidepressants, they affect your serotonin, and so does ecstasy. So if I just take a lot of the antidepressant, it'll be like I'm on ecstasy all the time. And so I was like mega dosing it, which is not a good idea. It doesn't feel like ecstasy, full disclaimer. I didn't really notice anything. I didn't feel anything. But it was kind of around that time I started to have like sort of weird delusions. So at the time, me and my friends, we all got really into conspiracy theories and stuff, and was listening to Alex Jones every day, and 9/11 conspiracies and the whole shebang, and we got really convinced that the Illuminati or something was like trying to lead us all into World War III, and we were all going to get drafted and die, and it was just part of this big plan to like lower global population or something. No knocks to anybody who believes in this stuff. Now I just sit with, I don't fucking know. Like I have no idea about any of this. Like I bet there's a ton of truth to a whole lot of that stuff. I really don't. I don't have the bandwidth to figure it out.
Right. It's not worth it.
But at the time, it was kind of screwed up because it was kind of like that, and then like our own conspiracy theories we were researching, and then at the same time, like this is like 2006, 2007. Everybody's telling you like, oh, by the year 2020, you know, climate change is going to like completely destroy the planet. Like that, if we don't change everything by 2020, like it all goes to hell. And this was not like a conspiracy theory. This was just like turn on the news, read the newspaper kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I got just totally like disincentivized to make an effort to make my life better in the future. Because it was like either World War III is going to kill you or climate change is going to kill you. So me and my friends were like trying to figure out how to like live in the woods like hunter gatherers and stuff, so that we could survive the apocalypse. And but at the time, like my brain is starting to go psychotic, so I'm like hyper vigilant about all this stuff, and I'm thinking about it all the time. And I was basically kind of caught between these two things. Like, okay, should I try to do something about all this and like save civilization, or just figure out how to live in the woods and get the hell out of here? And I decided to figure it out by like running away from home for a little bit and trying to live in the woods and like see what that was actually like. And I did this like during the school year, so I like brought my backpack and all my school books and like toiletries so I could like shower in the river and like walk to school or something. And I didn't tell my parents I was planning to do this. I just kind of left, so they were freaking out. But I didn't last more than 2 days. I wound up I chose like the worst situation to try to give myself shelter. I like put a old crappy tarp like over a hammock in the trees, and I was like, oh, this will be like a tent, but more outdoorsy. And the first thunderstorm that came through like just totally collapsed and broke my tarp, and all my clothes and food and everything just got totally soaked. And the land I was trying to camp on turned into like 1.5 foot deep mud, and I'm just like up to my knees in mud, and everything I own is totally drenched. And I was just like, oh man. What it did for me was it made me just so grateful for like being in a advanced civilization with like a shower and a house and heating and everything. And I kind of got hit with this like huge compassion for people in like the third world and stuff, who like don't have all those things I'd taken for granted my whole life.
Right.
And I was like, okay, screw it. Even if, the world might end, like I'm going to commit myself to making the world a better place and trying to figure this out.
When was this?
This was probably like June 2006. It's like end of the, or maybe May or something.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I went back home and apologized to my parents and take a hot shower. And like, wow, showers are amazing. I can't believe this. And was like, okay, I'm committed. How do I save the world? But it was so hard on my mind, because as soon as that like euphoria or inspiration wore off, it was like, wow, there's these huge problems. Like the Illuminati owns everything, and climate change is like, how am I going to convince myself to have enough confidence to try to do anything about any of this? And at the time, I was getting really obsessed with The Doors, the band from the 60s, and Jim Morrison, which my parents should not have shown me his biographical movie by Oliver Stone, because it just really inspired me to do more LSD. But I got really into it, and he became kind of a role model for me, which I hadn't had a role model in a long time. And it hadn't even occurred to me that like a role model was something I wanted or needed, but that's what came up for me. And one day I was on like a ketamine binge. So ketamine's like, everybody calls it horse tranquilizers, but it's just generally like a tranquilizer they use in medical situations. But when you take it, it's kind of like being like as drunk as you could possibly be without getting alcohol poisoning. So like it's very like dissociative and stuff. But what's interesting about it is it gets rid of fear. And so they're actually using it medically now, experimentally, to see if you can get rid of phobias. So let's say you're like afraid of spiders. They'll like put a spider in your hand while you're on ketamine, and you'll be like, oh, a spider. Like normally you'd be freaking out, but like your fear is just like totally gone.
Interesting.
And so they can like condition you to get rid of phobias. And so my phobia was like social embarrassment. And so I was like skipping school and doing ketamine. And then while I was on ketamine, I felt just totally invincible. Like all that paranoia was like totally gone. And I was like, oh, I should just go to school and like feel invincible, and I just go to class like on ketamine and just have this like confidence I never had before. And so while I'm going through this, I'm like, man, it'd be great if I could just make this last, have this total confidence. And I'm like, how could I convince myself to like feel like this all the time? And I was wearing like my shirt with like Jim Morrison on it. And I was looking in the mirror, and I was starting to like hallucinate that like my face kind of looked like his or something. And I was like, wait, what if I was Jim Morrison in a past life, And I just started thinking of the ways that we were similar. And I was like, wow, maybe I like some personality from the past life like came through, and now like if I convinced myself that I was him in a past life and he was like became all big and famous and everything, then maybe I'll have the confidence to pursue doing something big and really believing I can do it. And whether or not it's true, at least I'll be confident enough and believe it to actually try. And so, like, in this like moment on ketamine, I just totally convinced myself like Jim Morrison was my past life. That gives me every reason to feel confident in every situation I could possibly be in. And the weird thing was it like kind of stuck, so that like went away, and it really did improve my social confidence. But left me with this like weird game I had to play in my mind, where like anytime some like doubt that I really was Jim Morrison's reincarnation came up, I had to like convince myself why that was stupid, and so I just had to constantly like run through that in my mind to keep it going. And so one of the symptoms of psychosis is delusions of grandeur. So I think that was like one of my first like early symptoms. And so I kind of go through the summer. I have kind of a wild summer, a lot of LSD and parties, and having a lot more confidence with girls and stuff like that. And by the next school year, things got a little weirder. I had this like weird LSD trip with two friends where I think probably half the people listening to this aren't going to believe this, but we basically like learned to use telepathy for like the whole duration of the trip. So we were sitting around a table and like literally spent like however long LSD peaks last. It was like 6 hours or something, not saying a word to each other and just like sending thoughts and images and stuff.
Interesting.
And like, yeah, I mean, it was like crazy detailed conversation.
Were you able to talk about that afterwards and have like
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think what most people assume is like, oh, you must have just been like hallucinating that you weren't talking or something. But I don't think like LSD actually isn't that powerful. Like we're on that much LSD that like you wouldn't know if you were talking or something. And there actually was moments where like we did say something. There was like one moment where I was just like, okay, stop. Like I said it out loud. Like it was just getting too weird and I had to like say stop. And as soon as I used my words, it like turned off the telepathy. It was pretty weird. But so a really freaking weird experience and kind of uncomfortable because I was basing my social confidence on this whole like delusion of grandeur that once I could see how other people actually saw me was just like totally wiped out. It was like they're like thought it was just hilarious that I thought that this was the true, that I was like the reincarnation of Jim Morrison or something stupid like that. And so it was a very uncomfortable situation for me. Telepathy is kind of weird because like you can't like hide much. It's like you can't be like, oh, I'd like to select this thought and only let you see that. It was kind of like, oh, here's my thought, but then here's kind of what's playing in the background at the same time. It's like you can't really like hide things. So all kinds of like weird, embarrassing stuff was like going around, and it was a pretty uncomfortable situation. And I basically came out of that and kind of like immediately forgot about how uncomfortable it was and started just adding it to my delusion of grandeur. Like, oh, now I'm the reincarnation of Jim Morrison, sent here by, you know, aliens in another dimension to like save the planet from the Illuminati, and I'm a psychic, you know, and it just like added another layer to this whole ethos I was trying to create for myself. And I was like bragging to girls. I'm like, yeah, I'm like a psychic and stuff. But I couldn't really do it without the LSD apparently. But I like started to convince myself that I could, and basically wound up eventually having so convinced myself that like I was a psychic that I started to get kind of paranoid about it. So I'd be like high on marijuana, and marijuana can tend to create a lot of paranoia. And so I remember like sitting around my friends, we were like in the woods or something, and like some deer came by, and I was like, whoa, what if I like could talk to a deer? Like if I'm psychic and you don't need language to speak, like maybe I could talk to this deer. And I start like trying to send my thoughts to the deer. But then this like paranoid thought hits me like, wait, what if when I'm trying to send my thoughts to the deer, all my friends next to me are also getting that broadcast? And then I was like, wait, what if like you can't control the broadcast? What if just like anything you think at any time, like I've like broken something in my brain by like overusing it, and now like at any moment my thoughts can broadcast to anybody around me? And then I was getting all paranoid. I'm like looking at my friends out of the corner of my eye, like, are they hearing this thought? Are they hearing that thought? Are they hearing this thought? And I see my friends just like like not making eye contact with me, and like it's like, oh, that's proof that they're hearing my thoughts, you know, because they're like being all awkward and trying not to look at me, you know. And so like it didn't matter what anybody did or said, it was just proof that this was the reality. And what got really bad after that was like even after the marijuana like went away, I started to just get left with this like continually building paranoia about this. And then I basically tried to self-medicate with more marijuana and be like, oh, maybe I can fix it if I like smoke enough weed or something. And
Just made it worse, right?
it made it so much worse. And it was actually while I was like I like took like a huge dose at one point and got so paranoid that I thought like I'm like in my house and I thought like all my neighbors around me were just hearing my thoughts, and I started hearing their voices in my head like, get the fuck out of our heads, like we don't want to hear fucking thoughts anymore, like we don't want to watch you take a shit on the toilet anymore, you know. Like just and the worst part is like as soon as, you know, if somebody says like don't think of a purple elephant, right, and then as soon as they say don't think about it, that's all you think about. So it's like, okay, people can hear my thoughts, so don't think of anything like embarrassing or don't think of anything like mean that would hurt this person's feelings. And it's like suddenly all you could think of was all this negative stuff. And so yeah, so while I'm there like being really really high and really really paranoid, actually it hit me like, wait, am I schizophrenic? And then that was really scary because I was like, wait, what would be worse, if I was a schizophrenic or if I was uncontrollably psychic? I don't actually know which would be worse. And so it just made it like even worse. And eventually I kind of basically just stopped going to school. So all this happened kind of over the autumn, like the first school semester, kind of falling into this.
Nick, can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah, please.
Question for you, because
Yeah,
I don't actually know the answer to this question, so hopefully you do. What's the difference between psychosis and schizophrenia?
I believe psychosis is the umbrella term and schizophrenia is like a version of it. So my specific diagnosis was drug-induced psychosis.
Okay.
I don't totally know exactly.
Sure.
Schizophrenia has a bunch of different forms too. Sure. And there's a lot of overlap.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a good question. Anyways, so I stopped going to school because I was trying not to be around people at that point, and that's when my parents figured out something was going on. And my mom kind of like sat me down one day, like, "Why the hell are you home from school right now? Like, what is really going on?" And I was like, I did LSD and I got psychic powers. Now I don't know if I'm crazy or if I'm psychic all the time. And she's like, schizophrenic, and takes me to a psychiatrist that I saw as a child for like anxiety stuff. And he's like, oh yeah, you're not psychic, you're just crazy. Like, here's a prescription for the medication. And then he like kind of secretly told my mom, like, you don't want to take him home. Like, he's probably like a suicide risk. Like, take him to the mental hospital. And I was like totally willing to go to a mental hospital because I knew I was like really fucked up. So I was like, oh God, please just take me somewhere that's where somebody can fix me. And I wound up getting prescribed this like kind of older version of antipsychotics called risperidone that apparently they don't like give out a lot anymore. So I had like a ton of side effects, but those kicked in a while later. But basically I go to the mental hospital and they give me some like questionnaire, like, have you ever thought of killing yourself? And I'm like, yeah, I guess like it's like I thought about what killing myself would ever be a good solution to a problem, you know? And they're like, oh, have you ever thought of like how you would do it? And I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, I guess like jumping off a bridge would be like a pretty painless way to go, right? And they're like, oh, which bridge? And I was like, I don't know, the tallest one near my house. And they basically like took that as like evidence that I was planning to kill myself, which I thought was funny because I really wasn't. So I thought the way of questioning that was kind of funny. Mm-hmm. But I was like, yeah, please lock me up. Like, let's do it. So they basically bring me in, and I stayed there for 2 weeks, and they gave me sedatives and stuff. And what I thought was kind of weird was, well, first off, they did not believe the story about the telepathy thing at all. But I was like trying to do like experiments with them. I was like, okay, look. I know like you think it's not real, but like, I don't want to think it's real either. So let's just do an experiment and like find out, you know? So like, how about I just write a number on a piece of paper and I'll try to send it to you. And like, if you can guess it, like, you know, 5 times in a row, like I'm probably psychic. And if you can't guess it, like I'm probably not, and I can go home, you know? And, but they like wouldn't play that game with me. I imagine because when somebody's like really delusional, like you just don't want to like buy into their delusion at all. So you just tell them like, it's not real. And like, that's that. But it was just kind of odd because I really did have like a verified experience of telepathy, and then it was just like the question of like, where does that end? Where does it start? You know?
Right.
And the weird thing was actually later, actually right before I went to the mental hospital, I tried to self-medicate using LSD again, and I did it by myself, and kind of spent the whole time like paranoid. But then I had one moment where I was kind of having the purple elephant thing the whole time, like all you can think of is the most embarrassing stuff, and now I'm on acid, and the embarrassing stuff is taken on like a whole nother level of like caricature, and but at one point, like finally, like one little sliver of like a sort of positive self-image comes through, and I was like, oh my god, finally something positive. And because I'd like convinced myself like people were seeing my whole trip this whole time, I was like, well, I'll just share this one positive thing because like finally I have something like good to share about myself. And so I like sent this image, and it was like the weirdest image. It was like you would never like just pull this image out of a hat and like guess it, you know? It was like me as like a lion, but like my mane was made out of a sunflower, and I was kind of like Chinese or something. And there was like opium claps behind me. It was this really weird image. But I sent this to my friend John, who lived like a couple blocks away. And as soon as I sent it, it was like it looked like my brain was like a projector, like light shot out of my brain or something. And as soon as it happened, I kind of knew. I was like, oh, I was totally paranoid up until right now, but this time I actually did send something. And after that, I kind of had a mellower trip because I was like, okay, I kind of actually know the difference between when I'm using the ability and when I'm not. And a few hours later, I went on. At the time we were using like MSN Messenger, just like instead of Facebook and stuff. And so I go into MSN, and people like write their profile like having a great pizza today or something. And my friend John had changed his profile to stopped in for a visit with the sunflower China cat or something. And I was like, how could that be a coincidence? Like, that'd be so weird.
Weird.
Yeah. So anyway, so I wind up in the mental hospital. I'm like, and I'm trying to run this as like an experiment, and they're not having it. Here's the drugs and go to sleep or something. And while I'm there, my mom brings me a couple books. My mom was like training to be a yoga teacher at the time, or no, she was a personal trainer and was starting to get into yoga or something. And so she brings me a couple books, like a Dalai Lama book on meditation and a book on yoga and stuff. And so while I'm there, I'm kind of like, well, these people aren't really talking to me. Like nobody's giving me like therapy to maybe talk about like the fact that it's my insecurity and low self-esteem that maybe led me to delusions of grandeur and all this paranoia. Mm-hmm. They're not really interested in dealing with that. They just want to give me these drugs. So like, what can I actually do for myself? Maybe I'll learn to meditate. And so basically I spent 2 weeks there and started reading these books and stuff. And the drugs really did like lower the paranoia. So that really helped. And then I went home because I was starting to feel like I was doing better, and so they let me out. And basically got home, and a friend of mine came and visited, and he was like really into Buddhism and things like that. And he finally ran the experiment with me. He's like, well, let's just try it. Like, just try to send me your thoughts. And he built a lot of trust with me. He's like, yeah, you know, I'm like a really devout Buddhist. Like, one of the rules is no lying. So I swear to God, I won't lie to you. And so I tried as hard as I could to like send him something, and he was just like, nothing's coming through, man. I don't know what you're talking about. And it was like, that was like the first time I was like so surprised. I'm like, really? Because it sounds so loud in my head. Like it sounds like there's a speaker's attached to my head and I'm like blaring thoughts at you. Which is actually one of the weird symptoms in psychosis is it starts to blur the line between like your internal experience and your external senses. Sure. So like thoughts and everything like sound like they're coming from outside and things. So that really helped. And then he gave me another book on Buddhism, and it basically outlined, I believe it was a fictional account of the Buddha's life. So it was like an alternate story, like a creative writer had written for it, where the Buddha basically just got enlightened in a slightly different way. So he meditated sitting next to a river and just listening to the sound of the river, and that being the focal point for his meditation. And so I saw that and I was like, oh, like I like rivers. So I go to the creek next to my parents' house and probably spent like 6 months, 9 months or something. Just every day, like 2 or 3 hours, going to this river, sitting next to it, putting my mind on it. And basically, meditation is like really hard. So I don't recommend like people with psychosis like try to meditate 3 hours a day or something.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably make this like the last thing I did if I did it again. But I was the only thing I knew, so I just kept going. And meditation is kind of hard enough if you're like not psychotic and like your own voice is like constantly going in your head. But when you have like other people's voices like telling you what a piece of shit you are like all day, like it's even harder. Right. But eventually I got myself to like focus on this river, and it took months. But finally I got my mind to like totally be quiet. And once it had totally quieted, basically what happens is the conscious mind empties. Normally your conscious mind is constantly full of stuff. There's always some kind of background chatter going. But I finally got to the point where it totally went away, which basically created a vacuum that pulled what was in my subconscious up to the surface. Mm-hmm. And it basically confirmed what I thought, which was like, the psychosis is probably related to like my insecurities and all this crap I was carrying around, and not just like some chemical imbalance that happened as a fluke of genetics or something. Because like all my friends were doing the same drugs, like we were all doing the same stupid shit, and it was just me who went crazy, right? And so I think it was more to do with that. And so basically, like all this shit I hated about myself, all my shame, all my fear, everything, like just came out as like this mask coming off of me, and it was just like this mutant, like you're never gonna fit in, nobody's gonna like you because like you're this piece of shit. And at first it came up, and for a split second I identified with it, and I was like just terrified, like, oh god, this is the me I don't want people to see. But it was only for a split second, this like horror, and then it was like the mask came off, and I was like looking at it just as that, like just a mask that had been some like character I'd convinced myself I was or something. And kind of saw like once the mask was gone, I was like, what was under the mask? And it was just like this young person who was like totally worthy of love and like obviously not perfect and is totally worthy of like love and acceptance, and just realizing like how hard I'd been on myself, and I just like totally let it go in that moment, and like just basically cried in this river for like 20 minutes straight, just pouring snot into this creek. Yep. And again, it's not like that. Like that was like a split second of like a powerful healing, but it's not like the psychosis like went away after that or something. Right. But it kind of gave me enough of a clue, like okay, there is something like psychological going on, and I kind of saw like more of what I needed to do to continue to fix it. I feel like I've been droning on a long time, but
that's good, man.
That's the act one.
Yeah, I mean, like there's the build up to where we are now is so important. I think I love context, right? Yeah. When I listen to people, I value that context, because how you talk to me and how you tell your story is so like fundamental to your process of healing in general to me, right? Like mm-hmm. that's how I look at this, is that when you learn how to actually tell your story and how to tell it in a way that creates like a good ending, like that's part of healing in general. And I think it's awesome. It's great to hear like some of the things that I know would terrify people, like we're laughing about, right? Like people going through what you've been through, like they're probably looking at it right now and like fearful, angry, upset, like all of those negative emotions. And we're sitting here laughing about like the experiences and understanding like you can move forward and you can move out of these situations. And some people might be sitting here being like, man, you were crazy. And I'm sitting here like, that's incredible that you are able to look at these situations now and move through and guide yourself through. I think it's awesome. It's great to listen to you, honestly.
Thanks. Good.
Yeah. So yeah, keep going. Keep telling me what at this point we're kind of talking about moving beyond meditation, and I'm guessing you're about to expand your mind pretty well.
Yeah. So meditation was kind of my first tool, and after that experience of like the demon mask coming off, it was actually very hard to meditate. Like you think I would have been like, oh, that was so cool. Like, let's do it again, and just keep going layers and layers deeper or something. But I kind of wound up like I'd go to the river and I'd start to quiet the mind, but then I'd get sort of nervous, like, is like a demon gonna come out of me again? Like that was pretty scary. And so it got kind of hard to focus. Like I'd get to that point, but then I'd be like, I don't know, and I'd kind of back away from it a little bit. And I think by that point, probably like winter was coming, or this is all in like Toronto, Canada, and it wasn't being as like practical to go to this river. And I believe around the same time, uh, my mom, who's like I guess my personal savior, took me to a yoga class. And up until this point, when I thought of yoga, I thought of like my mom and a bunch of like middle-aged ladies like rolling around gently on the floor, and like doing little breathing exercises. And my mom takes me to like a level 2, kind of forget the name for it. It's kind of like Ashtanga yoga, I guess. But it's like a very like athletic yoga. It's like joining the circus kind of thing. And level 2 is like not a good idea in a yoga class if you've never done yoga. But I was like pretty overweight from the medication. I was probably like 70 pounds overweight. And yoga is like a body weight thing. So I'm like shaking the whole time, like holding like really basic postures. Like my quads are like convulsing. And I think I hadn't like really exercised since I was like 14 or something, because I basically quit all the sports I liked so I could do drugs instead. I don't advise. But yeah, there's like 50-year-old like ladies and stuff next to me, and they're like going through everything so easy, and I'm like shaking and sweating and slipping off my mat. I have so much sweat everywhere. But I get to the end, and I just couldn't believe how good I felt, like laying in shavasana, like the relaxation pose. Like my body was just in so much bliss, and my body had just felt like shit. Like aside from like being like anxious and afraid and stuff all the time, like the drugs, the pills I was taking just totally like numbed me. Like they got rid of my sex drive, and I had a angry leg syndrome, if you ever heard of that, or restless leg syndrome, but I called it angry legs. So my legs literally felt angry. Like they just wanted to like kick things all the time because like the blood wasn't getting into them or something. So laying in this class, it was like the first time I'd felt good in like 2 years or something. I was like, I can't believe I can feel this good. Like this is amazing. And I laughed, and I could like really feel like intuitively how like all that sweating and everything had really like detoxed me, and my mind just felt so clear. And so I was just basically like instantly hooked, and basically switched from like meditation more to that like physical practice. And what I kind of really liked about it was like the meditation like really did take like 8 months of hard work every day to get like 1 day of benefit. For me at the time, like nowadays I kind of know like how to meditate in a way like I get the benefit right away. Sure. But at the time, this like kind of militaristic, like I'm going to focus my mind on this thing, focus, like did not produce any benefit in the short run until like it created like an exorcism basically. Yeah. But yoga was just like, oh, my first time, and I'm like, I feel amazing, and this huge detox, and I got really hooked right away, and got a bunch of DVDs and stuff, and just started practicing a lot at home. And basically over the next couple of years, it like totally changed my life, like really helping me learn to relax into the psychotic experience. And I think that was one of the most important things I learned, because I actually really think it is the case, as Joseph Campbell says, like the psychotic drowns in the same water the shaman swims. And I feel like I like really found that to be true for myself, because if I got into this paranoid state, I could after learning yoga and everything, like learning to relax and let go, things like that, learning to get into my body and kind of out of my head, I basically found that I could actually let go into the experience as that paranoia was cropping up, and would basically have like a pleasant mystical experience. Like all this like religious imagery would just start forming in front of me, and so like instead of my creative mind forming like voices to tell me like bullshit about myself, it formed like beautiful visions and like ecstatic feelings through my body, if you believe in this kind of thing, like chakras opening and things like that. so yeah, yoga was like amazing for that, just helping me able to relax into those experiences. And so as they kind of come up, it'd be like, this is gonna be crazy, and then, but if I just let go,
Sure.
it'd be positive. And that was when I started to feel like the confidence, like, okay, like I think I could actually get off the medication, because even if I have like these quote unquote psychotic experiences, I can actually just like ride them, right? So started talking to my psychiatrist about weaning off the pills, and they were helping me get off. Another funny thing, like even after the mental hospital, I got put with this program where you kind of see a psychiatrist like once a month. And it was really the same. It was like just 100% like chemistry. It was like, okay, how's your symptoms? Like, let's weigh you, make sure you're not getting too fat on the medication. But it was never like, let's talk about like your childhood, or like,
Right.
let's dive into like what kind of traumas you might have that have like created all this craziness in you. It was just kind of this like monitoring program, which I found really weird. It's like nobody even wants to ask if I like need to talk to somebody. Like, what's wrong with you guys? But anyway, so yeah, they helped me to wean off, and kept doing yoga. And what was kind of crappy was like once the pills were gone, I still had like 90% of the side effects left over. So I had like cystic acne over like my whole upper body. I was like bleeding through every shirt. Like I was just covered in scabs because these pimples were so big and bloody and stuff. I had eczema all over my head and face. I like stopped being able to digest like a whole lot of foods. Like I couldn't eat dairy anymore or wheat, and I didn't really know that at the time. I just knew my digestion was like really whack. My liver was so inflamed or congested or something that like doing deep breathing exercises actually hurt my liver because my diaphragm would like press on it, and it was so tender. Like breathing hurt my liver.
And those are all side effects of the medications that you were on?
It's either the medication and or how hungry the medication makes you. So you just kind of eat all the time.
Yeah.
Which I actually think is part of how it works, because like food kind of lowers your cortisol and like stress hormones, and like is very like grounding. But yeah, those meds, they make you so hungry and I didn't know like what healthy food was. So I was just eating like literally like McDonald's for breakfast, KFC for lunch, another takeout for dinner, candy and pop and crap all day. And then like wondering why I have like eczema and stuff.
Right.
But what was I saying? Oh yeah, so I still had all these side effects left over. Also like mental side effects. So like I had brain fog like half the day, like literally my brain like feeling like it was pressing against the sides of my skull with like inflammation or something, and like basically couldn't think straight, but also couldn't think broadly. It was very weird. It was like once I got stuck on thinking about something, I'll just be like incredibly like angry and narrow-minded for like long periods of time, and like it's just like my head was just stuck or something. The only thing that really went away was the weight gain. Like I kind of dropped the weight as soon as the pills went away. But a lot of like sexual problems, like just not, having great sexual libido and things like that, kind of got a little better, but like stayed to quite an extent. So I'm still like doing yoga at the time, and I'm like, I really believe in like yoga as like this healing thing, but like obviously something else needs to shift because I'm still like so sick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the time, like I reconnected with an old friend who was like, just like, oh, you should try like the alkaline diet or something. And I was like, what the heck's the alkaline diet and why would that matter? It like hadn't occurred to me until that moment, like 4 years after the psychosis, that like the food you eat might have like some relationship to how healthy or unhealthy you are.
Right.
Which is like so weird. Like my mom was like a personal trainer and stuff, and this never occurred to me. But yeah, so I looked up this alkaline diet, and there's all this like raw vegetables and stuff like that, and I was making all these like green smoothies and stuff, and I was like really militant about it. Like everything I ever tried to fix myself, I was always like, I'm going all the fucking way, like we're doing this, So I got like that with like raw alkaline foods, and I don't think it made anything better. It seemed like it was just incredibly hard to digest. It's like eating grass all day or something.
Right.
Probably helped some stuff, but definitely wasn't good for me because I had like really compromised digestion. So I tried that for a while, and then because I was into the yoga world, like everybody's talking about, oh, vegetarianism, like that's like the way to go. It's like, better, you're not supposed to eat cows and stuff. And so then I got into vegetarianism for a while, and again, didn't really seem to make anything better, but I was like militant about it. And I'm like trying to tell everyone I know, like, you got to be a vegan. It's the best diet. It's the best for you. Even though I'm seeing like zero benefits from it, I'm like telling everyone else it's the best diet and they have to do it. Yeah. And so around that time, this was like 2012 or something. I wind up doing a yoga teacher training. And I think I was experimenting with like veganism at the time. And probably there was some like protein deficiency or something, and my joints like started falling apart from the yoga practice. And I basically got to the point where like I basically couldn't do yoga without being in like immense pain in like all my tendons and everything. Like all the connective tissues were just overstretched and stuff. And kind of had to take a break from yoga. And around the same time, I was like, my job, I was like cleaning a gym or something. And there was like an acupuncturist slash martial arts teacher who worked there. And he thought I would like this thing called Qigong, which was spelled with a Q. And I thought it was Qigong, but it's Qigong. And so he sent me like a little YouTube video of this teacher named Lee Holden. He like lives out in California. And I tried it. It was like the 7-minute routine of basically just moving slowly while breathing deeply and kind of linking the two together. And it was so simple compared to yoga. Like yoga's got this like weird dual benefit where you're like trying to get a 6-pack at the same time as like trying to like heal a bunch of trauma and stuff. Yeah. And that was like really motivating to like get you to do it. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to get like ripped while I get enlightened, you know? But eventually it like took a toll on my body. I think probably combined with the vegan diet didn't work super well for me. So Qigong was like kind of the same principle of like, oh, you're like moving in unison with your breath, but there wasn't this like super emphasis on stretching and strengthening and all that kind of stuff. It was more like direct, like, here, you're going to modulate your nervous system. And that's like the thing we're doing. And I was just amazed. Like I just did this like 1 7-minute YouTube video. And like after like, I think I'd been like doing yoga and stuff for like 4 years. And I was like, wow, I think I feel like more relaxed and centered and calm than I felt in this like entire 4 years of doing like 1.5 hours yoga and meditation sessions and stuff. So I was just kind of blown away right away and went to bed. And I think it was actually the same night I had this like wart on my foot that had been there for like 2 years or something. And it was this like really deep, gross wart. And I went to the doctor, they cut it off, they froze it off. I did the duct tape, I did the cream, like nothing was making it go away. And this night after doing Qigong for the first time, I'm kind of laying there and I'm like, well, what if I just like sent this like weird, like blissful feeling to that wart on my foot? And so I just kind of like kept bringing my attention to my foot and like directed this thing we call chi, which is basically just like your feeling in your body. It's kind of a weird term. You basically like just kept directing it to my foot until my foot was like buzzing with this like blissful feeling. And I woke up the next morning and this wart that was like 1/2 inch deep into the ball of my foot and like 1 inch or 2 across was like not only gone, but so gone that it looked like it had never been there. It was like totally brand new skin on my foot. And I was just like, oh my God, like how did that happen? Years later, reading the work by this guy, Dr. Andrew Weil, kind of popular in the health space. He basically says like warts are like one of the top illnesses that are most likely to go away from mind-body interventions, like using placebo or awareness or things like that to make them go away.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have no idea why. But so as you can imagine, I was like pretty hooked on Qigong right away and ordered all this guy, Lee Holden, all his DVDs and stuff. Started teaching myself. And also got kind of hooked because it's like Qigong comes from Taoism, which is this philosophy, Chinese philosophy that's all about like harmony with nature and things like that.
Yep.
And I'd always been like a big nature freak, and I wanted to be Steve Irwin when I was a kid and catch snakes on TV for a living. So I got really into that part, and eventually got like an appointment with Lee on Skype, and he basically like taught me some like personalized Qigong to largely deal with just like how like sensitive I was to others and their perceptions and things like that. And taught me like really this weird thing where like you're doing the Qigong and you build what we call the Wei Qi or guardian energy, which is it's kind of like the same idea as your aura. It just sounds cooler, guardian energy, you know. Sure. Yeah. Sounds less new agey. But I was doing this with him over Skype, and the weird thing about practicing with like a true Qigong master is like you feel like way more chi when you're doing it with them. So we're doing, and this is like over Skype. We're like on opposite sides of the continent, and he helps me do these exercises, put the chi in your chi field, and then this weird one where you like hold your hands against it, like you're hugging a big ball against your chest, and you like squeeze on the chi field. And basically, it felt like there was like a magnet between my chest and my hands, where this like if you had two north magnets and you try to push them together, but
Right.
they like push each other apart. I could like literally feel that around my body, and it just started to feel like I was just like encased in this field that would just kind of keep me protected, which normally sounds like a placebo-y kind of thing. But the weird part was like after I wasn't practicing live with this guy on Skype and started doing this on my own, I didn't feel this thing at all until I like moved to California to study with him, and I'm doing qigong with him, and then all of a sudden, just like in his class, like not even one-on-one or anything, all of a sudden I start to feel this crazy magnetic field around myself all the time again. So it's a very weird thing, qigong, but it really did help. Like I totally got this sense that like I didn't need to be so involved with other people's perceptions and everything. Maybe there's some kind of placebo aspect to that, but I found it very helpful. So I decided to try to become a qigong teacher, and packed up my stuff and moved to Santa Cruz, California in 2014 to learn qigong with this guy. And my plan was just to like get a job as like doing landscaping or some crap, and that I was already doing in Toronto. Which isn't very super great for your chi to like do manual labor all day, because you use up a lot of your chi and you don't have a lot for your qigong.
Right.
But that was my plan: just go to California, get whatever work I could, and just study with this guy. But I really lucked out because when I moved there, his assistant was moving to New York like a week later, and I was like, "Oh, you want to be my assistant? And you can kind of like intern with me and learn qigong." And
Wow.
I even offered. I was like, "Oh, well, what if you make that part of my payment, and I'll just like grab a sleeping bag, sleep in the back of the qigong studio,
There you go.
and you can just give me enough money to eat and just teach me qigong." And so I wound up like working for him, and it was a really interesting time because his wife had just, I think him and his wife had gotten divorced, and he was having a lot of money going to alimony and child support and lawyers and stuff, and so he didn't have a lot of money to like hire super professional like web people.
Right.
But here was this like 24-year-old kid who's like reasonably good with social media and stuff like that, and I was just like, yeah, I can do anything. And but basically taught myself like how to do film and things like that, and started helping him convert his business more to online, because up till then he'd been on PBS. He was like the famous like
Sure.
PBS qigong guy, and all the like old ladies at home doing qigong with him on TV. But PBS was kind of closing down their like fitness programs, so he was trying to go online. So I spent like 3.5 years helping him with that and following him around. He was also an acupuncturist, so I was following him around in the clinic, and he was teaching me body work and stuff like that. And kind of one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And at the same time, I kept learning about nutrition and got into tried all kinds of other diets like paleo and keto and all those kind of things, and kind of found like the double-edged sword to kind of most of them.
Right.
But kind of slowly over time was healing. A big part of it was working with some Chinese herbalists who really helped me with the skin and brain stuff. But I just spent a lot of time researching for myself stuff. And yeah, I guess after 3.5 years working for him, I like really like the psychosis stuff was so in the past, and I was really just dealing with just some lingering side effects from medication and bad diet and everything I'd done for years before that. So I felt like I was like mostly recovered, like almost to the point of being as healthy as like an ordinary person, which was like about as good as I was hoping for. And so at the time, I'd been trying to make money teaching qigong, but like nowhere was interested because they didn't know what it was or why anybody would pay for it. But finally, this like really like primo retreat center opened up in the mountains around Santa Cruz, and they were like it was like mindfulness and yoga and all that kind of stuff, but like with like crazy like multi-million-dollar buildings, like all modern with like waterfalls everywhere, so that like Google and Twitter and all those Silicon Valley people would run their retreats and everything there. So they were opening up, and I happened to open the newspaper on the day of their job fair, and I was like looking for movement teachers, and I was like, whoa, that doesn't just say yoga. Let me let me go see if they want something more than a yoga teacher. And they were stoked to have some qigong, so they hired me. And once they were on my resume, like all the other yoga studios that had said no up until that point were all of a sudden like, oh my God, you teach at the Multiversity. Like, come teach here. I don't know what Qigong is, but come do it. And basically overnight, like within a month, I went from 0 Qigong classes a week to like a dozen Qigong classes a week getting paid. And I really quickly had to find a replacement for myself to work for my teacher. And I guess it's been like 4 years since then or something. And just been doing that full time, mostly keeping my nutrition stuff to myself because it has seemed like such a esoteric thing. And there's been several times where, like, for instance, when I was vegan or keto, where I got some like initial benefits that then kind of turned into kind of more side effects than benefits. Sure. But because of those initial benefits, I became like a zealot, like immediately, like, oh, I tried this new diet and it was like the best thing. And obviously this is what's the optimal diet for human functioning, you know. Right. I was just trying to tell everybody to do it. So I kind of like slowed down a little after a couple of those experiences. And I was like, okay, well, diet seems kind of very personal and I feel like it's going to take me a while to be able to know what to tell anybody that will not just produce more negative than positive. Right. So I really focused on Qigong because that was like a really simple thing for me, like to help people. And eventually the pandemic hit and I switched everything over to YouTube mostly. Mm-hmm. And was just amazed, like once the YouTube started growing, all the weird things in the comments that people were like, oh my God, this helped my diverticulitis. Oh my God, this helped my bipolar. This helped, like, all just like the craziest things. Like, I'm not constipated anymore thanks to Qigong. And I'm like, it does that? Like,
yeah, it's so great.
Yeah. So I spent the last year working on YouTube. Just started my first Qigong teacher training, which has been all online. So I've been training other people to teach it, which has been a lot of fun. And then recently dove into TikTok to see what was going on there, and accidentally had enormous success.
Yep. Yeah. It can be that quick. TikTok is crazy, and it's still crazy.
Yeah. It's the frontier effect, right? Because not everybody's kind of certain about whether they want to get on there. So if you're kind of the early adopter, right, there's a lot of opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's exactly where I found you, right? Like I saw your video that's still blowing up right now. I think it's over 500,000 right now, 500,000 views.
Yeah, it's like 520,000.
Yeah, and it'll keep going. I think. You know, I've had quite a few videos do that, and they'll like 3 weeks later you'll see recycling, and it'll go up another 100,000 or something like that. It's so crazy.
Weird.
But here's a couple questions that I have. Well, I'll just start with one at a time. But with, you know, in that story, you were talking about how these mental institutions and the people working with them and working with you never really addressed any of the problems per se. They addressed the results of the problems, which were the obvious psychosis and the, I guess, the almost the aesthetic problems is that they had to manage you. But was there at any point, any time where they went into your past and talked about these things that you've been through?
No, I think as soon as they would hear me say like, oh yeah, I had this experience where I used telepathy, there was like, well, no point in talking to him about his past or something, because obviously he just has a bunch of like imaginary memories or something. So I probably should have brought my friends who experienced it with me, who are sane, and be like, look, ask these guys, you know.
Well, you should obviously start a podcast with them because they sound awesome.
They are interesting dudes. Actually, one of them's like a philosophy major now, so
for sure
that would be interesting.
Well, what are your thoughts on let's like the modern day understanding of mental health? What are your thoughts on it? How do you feel about it?
I think it's overall there's like a very cynical outlook that mental health problems are like just like kind of everything medicine has been, where it's kind of all goes back to the genetics. It's like, oh, you had a genetic predisposition to be this or that, and maybe you had some experience that triggered it. But now that it's here, like, let's not worry about like healing your past trauma or like fixing your fast food diet or anything like that, or just managing your stress a little bit. It's like, let's just like manage the mental illness with a chemical, like we're never going to heal it. It's never about actually healing something at the root. It's always just like, oh, here's something to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, seems so obvious that it's just about the financial incentives. It's like, well,
Yeah.
you make so much more money managing someone's illness for a lifetime than spending a few months like healing them.
Right.
And then the way you could manage or fix it, like you're not going to make money like telling them to meditate 10 minutes a day or eat vegetables or something.
Right.
You're going to make money on a chemical that you invented that you can patent, right? I'm sure this isn't news to anybody, but it's kind of a huge problem with the industry, it seems like.
So what is healing to you? Like, how would you, I mean, obviously we can define it here, but like for you and for what you've seen in your lifetime, what does healing really look like to you? And it can be subjective. It doesn't have to be an objective thing.
Yeah. Well, we can get into some real gray areas with healing. I'm a big fan of Eastern philosophy, and the sort of Buddhist idea is that like the basic human nature, like it's a sickness to begin with, right? Like the whole process of Buddhism is like healing from human nature.
Absolutely.
So like to go from like mental illness to what we would consider normal would be like going from very sick to just kind of sick in like Buddhist terms.
Right.
So it's not like you get to some point where like all of a sudden like, oh, you don't have like, you never get angry and you're never afraid, you're never anxious, you never like suffer from cognitive biases and delusions that make you think about things in a unproductive way. Like everybody's going to have that, even if you're like healed, quote unquote, right?
Right.
But there's definitely like gradations of like how like sick you can be, right? So when I posted that video, I think a lot of people, I got a lot of, not a lot, but like maybe 10% of the comments were like kind of angry, like, oh, you're telling people to like get off their medication or something. And I was like, well, I can see why you'd interpret it that way, but that really wasn't what I was trying to say. But people, one of the most commented on comments, people like arguing with each other over one comment,
Yep.
was somebody who was like, yeah, that's not how mental illness works. It's a chemical imbalance,
Yeah.
And like that's like saying you can fix diabetes with Tai Chi. And I was like, can you fix diabetes with Tai Chi? Wait, no. But the point is like everything about our experience is technically mediated by chemistry, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're the Buddha becoming enlightened, like you shifted your brain chemistry with meditation, right? You probably released a bunch of DMT or something and you've dissolved all boundaries between phenomena. Or if you're having an orgasm, like chemical change. You didn't have the orgasm because you took a pill that directly changed your brain chemistry.
Right.
It happened because you had an experience, right? When you eat food, right, your food literally becomes your brain and your brain chemistry. So it's not like any of this stuff is like separate from brain chemistry.
Right.
And taking specific like neurochemical pills is the only way to change your brain chemistry, right? So I think when it comes to like healing the brain, like there's so many ways you could look at it. Like you can have a spiritual healing that comes from, facing a fear or something. You can heal, like literally lower the inflammation in your brain. If you've had like a TBI and there's just inflammation all over damaging your brain, like you can use your diet and stuff and lower the inflammation. There's all kinds of ways that healing can happen, from like the molecular to the spiritual and all kinds of stuff in between. And usually they're like both happening at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the concept of chemical imbalance is overused and misunderstood. Like,
Yeah.
realistically, that's my experience. I'm certainly not a doctor, nor have I had any kind of experience with medications myself. I probably the complete opposite end of the spectrum. I've never done drugs other than like the prescribed medication for my knee surgeries. Right.
Yeah.
I've never drank alcohol. I've never done tobacco.
Wow.
Just never done that stuff. Right. Like I had a father that committed suicide at 6 years old, and he was all of those things.
Wow.
So that was a pretty powerful experience to say, hey, Dylan, you probably shouldn't do those things. You don't want to end up like that. So that's where my experience lies. Now, I work with a lot of people that have gone through, addictions, and like the people tell me all the time, like, mental illness is a chemical imbalance. So, but what does that even mean? Like, one, where does that, you don't just come out of the womb being chemically imbalanced, right? More often than not, you experience trauma is one of the things that I see is like when people that come to me, yeah, sure, they may have a chemical imbalance and they may want to commit suicide or they have flashbacks or PTSD or depression. But usually when we get down to business, those chemical imbalances or the PTSD or the suicide, and all of these things are effects or results of the problems of how people treat each other. And if you want to talk chemical imbalance, how people treat each other is the chemical imbalance creator. Like if I don't know if you've ever heard of Peter Levine. I think you would really like him.
Comes to mind, but I can't recall.
Somatic experiencing with trauma. I really recommend you look into his books. Like I think they would really speak to you. But like, such a huge factor in our growth is our mother, because our mother has the most, the closest connection to us. When we are being raised, our mother is the creator of all of our experiences in the initial phases of our life. And if those experiences are not good, you see changes within babies. And if there's distress in a baby, that's basically it's basically being abused as an adult, right? Like that there's a physical change that happens, because trauma is relative. Like trauma is relative to a baby, trauma is relative to an adult. Whatever happens. And what I see the most is that where I think, and again, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. It's just a theory, right?
I have to throw that out all the time too.
Right.
No worries.
Theory. Like, I'm not a doctor, but I see a lot of stuff. And what I think is chemical imbalances really start with communication. Like, I think, and because humans have mirror neurons, and as a kid, your mirror neurons are overactive. They're seeing everything in your world, and you're learning as fast as you can. And you're mimicking the things that happen, what your parents do, how they respond to each other. And if your mirror neurons are picking up negativity, right? Like auras and energies and cheese, and you're picking up this negativity.
I definitely know cheese.
Right. Chi. Is it chi? I don't. Is there a plural for chi?
Not really, but only because you wouldn't add an S, and it's a Chinese word, right? So you wouldn't add an S.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's American ignorance right here. But like, I don't even know where I was. Where was I going with that?
Mirror neurons.
Yeah, like when you start picking up that negativity, like you're developing a foundation of who you're going to become.
Yeah.
And if that's where you're going to build a chemical imbalance. And how do you fight that with more chemicals, comparative to trying to actually have a discussion about it and helping people understand their bodies, which is what Peter Levine really does with somatic experiencing, along with just like hyper-focused perspective building, right? Which I think is a lot of what yoga can do, and a lot of what is it qigong?
I
mean,
cheese gong. Thank you.
But I mean, like those things can develop the mindset of understanding both your connection to your body and your connection to other people, because we are a species that is like societal driven, or I shouldn't even say societal driven, but like we need other people. We gather chemicals and hormones from other people, and that's part of our survival,
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that make any sense? Did that make any sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of that narrow-mindedness about the chemical imbalance thing, you could probably get rid of just by like showing them any other culture.
Right.
It's like, how many cultures were there that used pharmaceuticals to change brain chemistry when you had a mental illness before. Like I think zero, unless you count herbs and stuff.
Right.
But even herbal therapy, like all the old herbal traditions, they weren't like, oh, here's white willow bark and it has salicylic acid and it does this to your, prostaglandins. They weren't thinking about like that at all. They really thought about like its effect on your spirit. Like that was the crux of especially Chinese medicine. Like they would say like the best doctor doesn't work on the body, they work on the spirit. And so they would look at like, how does this herb affect like your mood and your spiritual outlook and your temperament and stuff? And the effects kind of wash down to the body from there to a large degree. But yeah, it's like pharmaceuticals are literally like 100 years old, and there's all kinds of therapies you can find in the past. Like you go to a shaman and they would put you into a trance, and there'd be some like archetype you hadn't been dealing with in yourself, and they would help you like confront that archetype. They'd usually do it in a more metaphorical way, like it's literally a demon that's like another spirit and you're dealing with that.
Right.
But you can kind of look at it more from a Jungian psychology, like, oh, it's like an archetype. It's like a part of yourself you haven't integrated and things like that.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like I think, is psilocybin a psychedelic?
Yeah, that's the active ingredient in mushrooms.
Yeah, I mean that's mushrooms have been such a prominent like herbal medicine for so long, but it's not a, like, if we really think about it, it's not really a focus of medicine now. And
yeah,
that's always interesting.
You mean mushrooms in general, or psilocybin mushrooms?
Well, I mean all mushrooms, but most, like, psilocybin has there's a lot of research being done now on psilocybin being a not necessarily a cure, but something that can help support and help people work through PTSD right now.
Yep. I think one thing I've heard a lot about that sort of thing is you can have the experience on the trip and it like shows you some great revelation, and totally changes your life. But it might also show you like some kind of habit you actually need to implement in your life in order to maintain that level of health. And if you kind of don't pick up that habit, you kind of, what I've heard is you just kind of slide back to baseline.
Gotcha.
And that kind of goes with my experience too. I only had like 2 years as like a teenager where I was using that kind of stuff. But I would have like some great revelation. You're like, oh my God, like this is how I have to live my life. And then kind of like pretty quickly back to like the ordinary. Yeah. So like really common one is people, they'll do it and be like, oh my God, I have to meditate every day. Like, that's what's gonna maintain this. Or I have to talk to my father and like forgive him or something. And if you don't do it, it's like the trip was just kind of useless.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's all very interesting. I don't have enough experience in understanding, the not necessarily, I guess, the pharmaceutical medication, but also like herbal medicine side of things.
Yeah.
It's not something that I've really dived into. It's something that I see the effects of, right?
Yeah.
I see people coming to me consistently talking about like, I've been over medicated. There was never any healing that was involved with my medications. It was always something that held me down more than it helped me. And I always see, just therapy in general, just not being a beneficial thing for a lot of people. It doesn't mean it's not beneficial for people. It's just the people that come to me, it was not beneficial. What are your thoughts on the mental health as a business kind of thing, of all of it, not necessarily the institution of medication, but like therapy in general, therapists, psychologists, psychotherapists? What do you think about all of it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm still to this day surprised that I wasn't assigned a psychotherapist or some kind of talk therapy as part of the thing. I think partly maybe it was because I was diagnosed as like drug-induced psychosis. So to them, it's like, oh, this has nothing to do with trauma. It's like entirely biochemical. Like you did too much acid and now you're crazy. But it really does surprise me. But I do feel like there is a lot of limitations to talk therapy. I think just like, I mean, I think talk therapy is useful, but I mean, just like anything else, like qigong, very good, improves your overall health, like improves a lot of things. There's some things that are going to be very predictable, like you're for the most, like 90% of people are going to find like chronic pain decrease or chronic stress decrease, but it's not like, oh, I have cancer. I heard like some people have cured their qigong with cancer, so qigong is like 100% going to cure me. It's like you might be in like that 30% of people or something that like qigong was like the thing that made the difference in your cancer.
Hmm.
And for most other people, it's probably going to be like, oh, qigong was like probably a helpful tool that was like smart to include in your therapy. But if it was the only thing you did, you probably would have died, right?
Yeah.
And I think probably talk therapy is like that. Like it definitely has its uses. But often, and sometimes there's like some huge breakthrough, and it's like talk therapy, that was the thing that set things right.
Right.
And other times it's like, if your only tools were like pharmaceuticals and talk therapy, like
Yeah.
you'd be like pretty out of luck, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think also I assume I think you probably work with a lot of guys, right? Do you do a lot with like veterans and stuff?
Honestly, not really. A
Oh,
lot of
okay. I thought that was your whole brain.
uh I it's funny because I stepped into all of this expecting it to be.
Yeah,
And with the military, I do speak in front of different units nowadays with talking about suicide and talking about what I've been through. But my personal business, my mental health coaching is probably 85 to 90% females.
oh wow.
It's mostly women who have been through some kind of domestic violence,
Mm,
or even childhood experiences that were traumatic. Um, you know, a lot of what I've seen has been sexual in nature, and it's completely different than what I expected to see. But
yeah,
yeah, that's where I'm at. I see far more women than I do men.
that's really interesting. I wonder if part of that is maybe because of your military background, like you represent like a masculine figure, but that masculinity with like a softness and compassion that
Right.
maybe if they'd had like really negative experiences with males, like it's
Yeah.
like, oh my god, a healthy male figure, you know, like
Right.
you're not a pansy, but you're not like,
Right.
a brute either.
Absolutely.
That's really
That
interesting. That kind of modulates what I was going to say. I was going to say like probably there's like a big gap in the like mental health world where like if you're a male with like mental health problems, you're like, here's your female psychiatrist and your female therapist, and you're supposed to tell them about like your sexual problems and
right.
like stuff like that. And it's like that's probably very useful in some situations. Maybe in the opposite case where like maybe they've had very negative experiences with some like horrible mother or something, and now there's like a good female role model or something. But I feel like there's like a lot of need for the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think this is maybe especially true for males, where like males like desperately need male role models and like male mentor figures. And
Absolutely.
when I look back at like me in high school, it's like, oh my god, if I had just had a mentor, I feel like that would have solved like 95% of my problems. Like,
Right. Well, I mean, like, look at how, um, look at social media right now. Like people like Jordan Peterson
yeah,
and David Goggins and
Jocko,
Jocko, Gary
yeah,
Vaynerchuk, right? Like these, each of them in their own way is a mentor to these guys.
yeah,
It's what's interesting to me is like how people are being shown these guys, right? Like I have
yeah,
I have nothing again like nothing against like David Goggins and Jocko. Like they're awesome guys, but they're both like Navy SEALs. Like they're both on the literal pinnacle
yeah,
of like warrior mindset guys. Like
yeah,
99% of the guys out there are not going to become Jocko and David Goggins. I shouldn't even say 99%. It's more like 99.9%.
yeah,
You know? And it's not exactly an effective way of looking at your life. Like all of these guys follow these two and they're so focused on becoming like, I gotta wake up at 4 a.m. and just be a hammer, right? Like
yeah,
maybe you're not a hammer. Like
yeah,
maybe you're more like a scythe or like I don't know, a shovel. Like you've got to
yeah,
find like I think what the world really kind of needs is
mhm,
is guys to step outside of this masculine box that they think they have to be in,
Mm.
and step in, like, I've got to be a warrior, I've got to be a US Navy SEAL or or special forces or a ranger or something like that. I've got to have this
Yeah.
hard mindset. I think you have to have something that is capable of being hard, but you
Mm.
also have to have the opposing opposite, like
Yeah.
softness and
Yeah.
ability to respect people's boundaries. Exactly, yin and yang. Like
Yeah.
it's simple. Like you have to be able to play both worlds, because you're not just going to talk
Yeah.
to Jocko and David Goggins all day. Like
Yeah.
you're going to talk to women. How do you talk to women? Because that's
Yeah.
a
Got it.
pretty big societal problem right now.
Yeah.
You know, and that's that. Like I think we need more guys like you and me need to be stepping out on social media and saying, like, you don't have to be like David and you don't have to be like Jocko. They're great guys. There's nothing wrong with them. They speak a great message,
Mhm.
but not all of their message is going to apply to
Yeah.
how you live your life.
It's just like a medicine, right? Like medicine in the correct dose for the correct person, right? Very effective. But you give it to someone else and it's like poison for them, right?
Right.
So like if you thought about it in Chinese medicine, they would say like, if you have excess yang, right? You're so in your masculine, active, disciplined, vigilant self that you ignored your yin, right? Then giving like an herb or something that increases the yang further is going to be poison, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And you obviously need something to strengthen your yin, your ability to just soften, relax, listen, receive, things like that.
Right.
So I definitely think they're a medicine for a lot of guys. I've found them helpful at times, that
Right.
sometimes they're the exact right message I need to hear. And
Absolutely.
sometimes it's like, I don't know if more push-ups are going to get me where
Right.
I'm trying to go, so. But we
Right.
actually have a saying in Qigong. I'm going to butcher this because this won't be word for word, but basically like, it's like you need the hard to attain the soft.
Yes.
Like, because a lot of people, they get into Taoism, which is where Qigong comes from, and they immediately gravitate to the like, oh, it's the art of effortless power, and you become like water, you go with the flow, you're soft. There's not even like really like a lot of rules of morality in Taoism. It's sort of like, oh, if you just cultivate a good heart, like morality is just going to spontaneously come out of you. You're like, you don't need rules or a code to live by, right? And those are all like super beautiful ideas, but like just because like you read them in like the Tao Te Ching, like the Taoist text once, like doesn't mean you're gonna like immediately be able to like express them in your life in any profound way.
Right.
So like the way you get there is gonna take like some discipline, right? You're gonna have to train your qigong, train your meditation, like actually learn to use softness in a way that helps you to be more effective. And they say, I think, they say when you have a beginner student, you say, oh, we're going to take your iron bar and grind it into a fine needle. We're going to put you through this process of this grind. We're just going to train this thing like over and over again until you're the fine needle. And it's like at that point, like the yang transforms into yin, right?
Right.
So you always need both, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like Jocko's book is, and well, Jocko's book is in my top 10 books. Like on my website, it's one of my top 10 books.
Oh, nice.
I think it's an incredible book, and I think Jocko's perspective is incredible. But
you see, looking at people implementing it, they like kind of,
it's not everything.
they don't take it with a grain of salt. They just take it all the way. I think the same with like Jordan Peterson. Like if you really listen to him, he gives like a pretty nuanced message.
Yep.
But then like this is what happens with every movement. Like you have some like figure and they have some message, right? And then the followers pick it up and they're like, let's take this message to the 1000th degree, and they become zealots. So like you look at like Jesus. Like Jesus was like, oh, forgive your neighbor, and people were like, oh, kill witches.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Jordan, like I love Jordan's book, and Jordan's book is also one of my top 10 books, but
Cool.
it's not my top book, right? Like,
Oh, what's your talk book? You got me curious.
The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel
Oh.
van der Kolk. It's actually about trauma,
Cool.
right? So like,
nice.
it's The Body Keeps the Score, Waking the Tiger, which is by Peter Levine. So
Mhm.
both of these books are about trauma.
You're gonna have to send me those.
I will.
Write those down for me at the end.
For sure.
Maybe we can put those. Oh, you have the list. I'll just go to your list.
Yeah, absolutely. Just go to my website.
Nice.
Those, because what what is more important than other people's messages is
Mhm.
the understanding of how your life has impacted you.
Mhm.
Right? Like your body has been impacted by every single person that has talked to you, spoken to you, worked with you, hurt you, right? Like one of the first things that I want to do in understanding people is understand their pain, right? Like because your pain often implements the understanding of how you use perspective, right? How you look at life is really, really fundamental by how you look at pain, right?
Mm.
Like were you abused as a kid? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna fundamentally change how you look at life, you know, and how trauma informs our vision and what we think we can do and what, you know, who we are. Like trauma literally changes the brain. That is a scientific fact that, right, like more than one person has found, like Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, these guys do this trauma work in the study and find out what the brain does and what it can and cannot do because of trauma.
Mm.
Like it's a thing. So trauma is more important than the perspective of other people to me.
Mm. Yeah.
But you know how I've kind of changed my life and adapted is looking at that trauma and looking at how that trauma impacted my perspective. It was fundamental for me to look at other people and learn how they look at life so that I could inform my own perspective.
Mm.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I looked at Jocko's book. I looked at, you know, David Goggins's book. I looked at Jordan Peterson's book. I look at 55, 60, 70 other books, you know, in a
Mm.
couple of years to find out which parts of it would work for me.
Mm.
And I took parts from Goggins and I took parts from Jordan Peterson and Jocko, but I also took parts from Brene Brown and Peter Levine and, you know, Bessel van der Kolk and their scientific and their
It's a very, very nice yin yang balance you got there with your books. I like it.
right. Well, you know, I don't look for happiness. I look for balance, right?
Mm.
Like like when people come to me and work with me, I'm not trying to help you find happiness. Like
Mm.
it's not, it's not a thing. Like you can find happiness watching one TikTok video and laughing because the dog does something stupid, right?
Yeah.
That's happiness. Like I want people to find balance. And
Mm.
if you're going to find balance, you're going to have someone that's willing to both treat you with empathy and support, but also have accountability in a sense of, I don't know, like respectful judgment
Mm.
and like empathetic criticism in a way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think kind of good talk therapy is. But I'm not seeing many, like I see the people that never got that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where
Do
I'm at.
do you think I was just thinking about how you're saying mostly women come to you. Do you think there's just not as many men who are looking for help? Like maybe there's as many who need it, but do you think they're just not looking for it?
So it's an interesting
Or maybe is
question.
is TikTok mostly? Maybe it's just TikTok you're getting your clients from, huh? So a
Well,
lot of women, more
I
female.
think that's probably a big aspect of it. But here's the thing: I've been watching people like Gary Vee, Jocko, Jordan. Like I've been watching these guys, right?
Yeah.
And I pay attention to their comment or their content, but I also pay attention to who comments,
Hmm.
right? And when
Yeah.
you watch like guys like Gary Vee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gary Vee has huge followings of guys that are like, I want to be Gary Vee, you
Hmm.
know, and you've got Jordan Peterson. Like Jordan Peterson has literally made a movement for men, right?
Yeah.
Like that wasn't his intention, but that's
Yeah.
what he got. Like
Yeah.
he is like the hero for young guys because he talks about, you know, how young guys are being kind of like abused or mistreated and not supported.
Hmm.
So these guys are looking for it, but they're not looking for it like maybe the traditional uh like if you look at if you look at social media,
Mm-hmm.
like you've got a guy and you got a girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
Girls are maybe more willing to step into something new and say, hey, I want to try this, you know, with Dylan. I resonate with him,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and obviously TikTok, you know, I hit TikTok big. So a lot of my people are, a lot of my following is female. So
Mm-hmm.
they obviously go that way. But I don't think there's many content creators that are what men want
Hmm.
yet.
Hmm.
or I don't think they're prepared for. I'm seeing more men now than I
Yeah.
did in the beginning,
Oh, interesting.
but it's interesting, right? Like you see Gary, you see Jocko, you see Jordan Peterson, but you don't see, guys step like those aren't one-on-one coaching like they need. Those aren't you don't see therapists like that,
Yeah.
right?
I think this kind of speaks to my own experience. I think part of it might be, yeah, getting that one-on-one thing is like less something, not as something men are as comfortable with. Like,
Right,
I know for myself, like generally over the years, like if I could choose between like, oh, I just let some like downloadable video course that I just kind of do on my own in my room,
right,
or like going to somebody and having to like tell them about all my problems, like I'm generally going to pick the one where I can stay anonymous, you know?
right.
And that might have a lot to do with like some like evolutionary psychology. Like
Sure.
men maybe kind of know like if you tell other people your weaknesses, like it might get you killed, you know?
Right.
And
So that's an interesting thought for sure.
yeah,
I mean,
there's
I've been
actually I've heard about some studies with like teenagers where um, they were researching like uh, girls versus boys, like what how do they feel after talking about their problems, and like boys generally feel kind of like awkward and weird and like embarrassed, and girls are like relieved, like, oh, so I thank God I finally got that on my chest, I got to talk about it.
right,
And like there's, we can argue like for the rest of the time about whether that's cultural or evolutionary,
right.
but I think there's a good like reason to believe there's some evolutionary component to it. Like guys are trying not to get like stabbed in the back while they're taking a piss in the woods, you know?
Right. Exactly.
So,
No, it's an interesting thought though, and that's something I've been paying attention to for the past few years, and just seeing, seeing how guys interact on social media versus how women interact on social media. It's just really, really interesting.
yeah, chicks love to vent, right?
Yeah.
That's all generalities, but it seems more common that like females will go on and be like, "Oh, here's something terrible that happened in my day. I just need to vent about it,"
Yeah.
and guys will be like, "Here's a funny meme."
Right. Right. Yeah. It's definitely something that intrigues me. Definitely something I'm gonna be
Yeah.
continuing to push to learn and grow, because I
Do you
want
ever
to go
do you ever
ahead.
do group coaching?
It's soon. I've
I'm,
been
I'm I'm curious if that would attract more guys because they might just feel more uncomfortable with like the one-on-one like intimacy feeling. But if it's
right,
like a group and it's kind of fun, it might be more
right.
likely to join. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's something that I recently did a talk with a men's tribe. It's like my friend Chris runs it. Has great conversations with these guys. It's all obviously all men. And I gave my story, right? Like I've been, I lost my dad to suicide at 6 years old, and then my life just went downhill from there.
Hmm.
Um, Abused by the next guy in my life, bullied in high school, joined the military pretty much to die, and went to Afghanistan, saw some terrible things, and then came home, tore my ACL, and I was alone in Fort Knox for like 7-8 months after
Hmm.
all of this. Um,
Hmm.
and and I had this whole conversation, and it got to the point where I chose suicide,
Hmm.
um, and didn't go through with it. But then that was the moment where I changed, and I'm talking to all these guys, and expressing, myself, and there were parts of it where like gets me emotional sometimes, um, and you know, watching guys react versus watching women react is very interesting, because I've spoken to women in
Hmm.
in a group, and I've spoken to men in a group now. And speaking to men in the group, I have no idea whether they actually like appreciate the
They're just,
story.
they're just kind of stone faced the whole
Right. Yeah.
time.
Just
Yeah.
stone. Right. And, by the end, like I opened it up to questions, and if anybody has any comments, and like every single guy was like, holy shit, man, that was powerful. Like this is like incredible. And I'm
Yeah.
Dylan, like, so like, I'm so honored to like watch you and listen to this. And I'm like, well, that's great, man. I had no clue if you actually cared. But it's like, it's super interesting to see the openness of emotions between men and women.
Hmm.
And obviously we like society doesn't have it right for men. Like
Hmm.
there's no allowance for, and whether that's something that has maintained, I don't even know, but there is no openness for male emotion.
Yeah.
And it's being proven every time I stand in front of soldiers and talk to them about suicide, every time I tell my story to, a men's tribe, something like that. Like it's crazy. It is
Hmm.
so incredible to see the difference,
Yeah. Very true.
But,
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah, I actually teach with a company we run called Resiliency First,
sure.
and we run retreats for like first responders who are either have PTSD or trying to prevent it. Mostly we've done like fire departments. We've also had police and military and stuff.
Hmm.
And I've kind of had like the same experience. Like I'm teaching them qigong. I start with some like speech on like what I've been through and how qigong helped me and what qigong is. And okay, let's do some qigong. And kind of the whole time, I was like, I have no idea if this is like going over well at all. It's like this group of like sturdy firefighters that are just kind
Right.
of staring at me. And but then at the end, it's same deal. Like 70% of them come up to me, look me in the eye, shake my hand, thank me, tell me how cool it was, or how much they got out of it, or something they appreciate about my story, or they asked for my YouTube channel.
Yep.
But you couldn't tell like the rest of the time.
Right.
But they actually turned out to be like my favorite group I ever teach because normally it's like if I teach a new group of people, they're all like, "Oh, that was like fun," and they just like bail. But this group, like, that is like so I don't know, some like honor culture or something that they're like, "No, you go up and you thank the,"
Yeah.
and they all come shake my hand firmly and stuff.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
they're really fun. But I did notice like the one thing that seems to work really well is using humor because
Yep.
it really like yeah, humor just like totally breaks the like awkwardness of like, oh, we're talking about like really personal shit here. So
Yep.
I just like he's throwing enough jokes to kind of like keep it a little light once in a while, and
Yep.
that they
Yeah.
can definitely men can express laughter for sure, if not crying and stuff. So
Right. For sure. That's definitely something, I've been in the infantry for 13 years now, and like we have some dark humor, and
oh yeah,
I'm able to work with that a little bit with, especially with my military speeches and talking to soldiers. But yeah, it's always interesting. But it's when you get to the end, that's when you really realize just how much you've really impacted people, and
yeah,
it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to see.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
well,
That's
here's Nick. Before we end, I've got to end. I've got a meeting coming up actually.
sure.
Um, before we end, if there was a message you could leave the world, what would it be?
This is gonna sound funny, but if you're trying to heal your brain, stop eating vegetable oils. Canola oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, cottonseed oil, soy oil, corn oil. These are super cheap, crappy industrial oils that we used to use in the 1930s to make household paint products because they oxidize so quickly at room temperature that they turn from a liquid to a solid. And eventually they figured out how to make them cheaper with petroleum and to make paint with petroleum instead of these oils. And the farmers and everything making these seeds had to figure out some other way to sell them. And so they marketed them as a healthy alternative to butter and lard and other kind of animal-based fats at the time. And that's basically when we started this like kind of myth that vegetable oil will like make you skinny and healthy and stuff like that. And I think it's the worst thing we ever did for our brains. And I can't think of anything I did on my healing journey that made a bigger boost in how my brain recovered than cutting that stuff out of my diet. So replacing those seed oils with coconut oil, butter, clarified butter called ghee is a really good one to cook with.
Sure.
Olive oil, avocado oil. Um, there's a ton of debate, like everything in the nutrition world. There's a crap ton of debate in this, but this is one I'll stand firmly by. And they put it in everything, so it's actually really hard to get out of your diet. Because you go to a restaurant, that's the cheapest oil. That's usually what they're cooking in. You buy packaged foods. That oil is so indigestible, bacteria doesn't want to eat it, so they use it as a preservative for like bread and crackers and stuff.
Sure.
So it's hard to avoid, but I think worthwhile doing if you feel like you've got especially like TBIs, anything where you got like inflammation in your brain or like damage to your neurons. I think that can upgrade you pretty good.
Interesting. I never
Yeah.
would have expected you to say something like that. That's awesome. That's good.
Oh, also believe in yourself. Sure. Something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have been the first thing. Like, man, it's probably gonna be something about qigong or like meditation, something like that.
Yeah.
Like, who knows? Like, that's
Well, it's funny. I've been trying to like stick in the qigong wheelhouse for a long time.
yeah,
But after this TikTok thing, like usually when I'm posting online, it's like, oh, this is qigong, and here's why it's good for you, or here's a qigong movement, and this is what it's good for. Like I kind of make it about like the tool instead of the benefit.
yeah,
So this video that went viral wasn't really about qigong. Like I'm kind of doing qigong in it, but all the words are like, oh, here was my mental health journey. Here's what I went through,
yep.
and yeah, qigong was a little part of that, but also like nutrition and a bunch of other stuff. And like I got so many questions like, what do you eat? What do you eat? What do you eat? And I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to like stop the imposter syndrome and actually say what I think about nutrition, because it was like at least half the picture on my journey. So I think probably important to get some of that out there.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, it's been awesome talking to you. And honestly, we probably have more to talk about, and we
Sweet.
probably should figure out another time to do that.
Cool.
But yeah. Is there anything else that you want to finish out with? Any last words you want to say?
No, this was super fun. I'm really stoked, and yeah, I hope to do this again soon.
Absolutely, man. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on this week's episode. Don't mind my my word throw up there. It's been an absolute pleasure, and join me next week on the Dylan Experience, where we'll be talking about something that involves things I don't even know. But thank you.